today I will be talking about how we drive business value with our department in HR. And just a little background about myself. I'm educated in applied math. I have had an analytical career, and 4 years ago I joined HR to set up the analytics team. And now I'm in the VP role, which was previously taken by Thomas Rasmussen, as some of you have met as well before. So let me start with our favorite slide, the Shell slide that says that any information shared today is not to predict any stock prices. So we do predict, but not the stock prices, at least not today. So just as a one that we need to do. So here's some numbers for those of you that don't know Shell. Shell is a strong brand. It is mainly known for our gasoline stations, but we do much more. We actually explore oil. We sell. We refine that. We create chemicals, and we sell products to customers, but also to larger businesses. The one important number on this slide is the one on the top left, which is 92,000 employees. At least it's relevant for this presentation. This was at the end of 2016. It's lower now. It's the annual report will come out next month, but it's around 83,000. But my department does all the reporting and all the analytics on all these employees. So we have a global exposure, and we are interested in how these people do, how they feel, how they perform, how many we have, some of the metrics as I'm sure you all produce. But more of that later. But just a little quick intro. So this slide, and I've used it so many times that some of you may have seen it already, but it's one of my favorites. This is the business case for HR. And the business case for HR is that if you do things right, you can actually have a tremendous impact on business performance. So if you do everything right in HR, you can actually make a difference of 27% on your financial performance or your operational outcomes. And to be honest, this 27% or 22, it doesn't really matter, but if we can make a difference of 5%, that's in the case of Shell already quite a lot of money. So we're after sort of this business impact, and you can map all the HR activities under the 3 bullets that you see on the left. We're hiring skilled people. We're actually providing trainings and talent programs to make sure that people are skilled. We provide, well, we hope we pay them enough so they're highly motivated. We also want them to be in an environment where they actually thrive. So which means that we need to provide inclusive work environments. We need to give them tasks that that are relevant for the person, so the right person on the right job. And all of this is, this whole business case is not something we invented. It's actually something that the world knows for quite a while. So this is this write-up is actually extracted from an academic publication out of 2012. But the reason I like it is because the business case for HR analytics is not any different than it is for HR. We just do it in a different way, but we're also after driving business impact basically with our departments. We do it in a different way, as I said, because we do this with evidence, right? Data evidence, if you like. We are transforming the Shell HR organization from an organization that is largely based on experiences, intuition, and beliefs towards a balanced organization that takes us data evidence into account. I'll say much more around this, but one of the examples is that we have a variable pay system, as many other companies, because we have assumed that variable pay has a positive impact on performance. But those assumptions have actually never been really assessed. And you could think of that in a sales environment as variable pay having an effect, but are we sure this also works for engineers in a refinery? Or do we understand how this works for R&D folks? And those sort of questions, that's the challenges we put up, and that's sort of the questions we try to answer through data analysis. So I thought, because webinars are not my favorite way to deliver presentations, to make a little poll to get you woken up, and Shane has kindly done some pre-work to actually, I'm just curious where you are. Are you in your company seeing also a transition towards some evidence-based, considering your job titles, you would hope, but I'm just curious to get some feedback here, some input, and I've deliberately not taken a middle option, so I force you to choose below or above the middle. So I'll just give you a minute and you can ask. I see a question coming in from Gustavo. I'll just wait 2 slides and I'll give you the answer.
Here you go, Esther. Hopefully you can see the results on your screen right now.
Yeah, I can. Can everyone see? Oh, sorry. I've accidentally stopped sharing my screen. Let me put that back up. Where were we? Can you see my screen again? Sorry, just checking. Yeah. So, all right, that's good news. None of the people on board have not yet seen any transition, but actually the majority is still, like that. Occasionally only we take evidence-based decisions in HR. And but quite a few already have made a first step. And I also would say that we're not at the right-hand side of the chart. We are not always making evidence-based decisions. And I think it's also good to realize that there's a lot of things about our people that we don't know. But we're all, despite my efforts to not pick a middle ground, there is quite a few middle. Everyone is sort of in the middle. Thank you. Oh, it was even 1 slide only, Gustavo, to answer your question here. And the reason I put up the poll is that sometimes I notice that there is this belief that Shell has, from one day to the next, decided to invest in HR analytics, and that's why we're in place and why we're successful. And that's really not the case. Already in the early 2000s, we built a global database for our HR systems. It's called Shell People. It's an SAP data system. But we went to global processes and procedures. We started collecting this at a global scale. We covered a lot of the data privacy regulations into this one, maybe more about that later if there's any interest. But centralizing that also over time led to centralized reporting, to self-service tools, to at some point standardization of the metrics, because not everyone was using the same definition of FTEs. And in 2014, so almost 10 years after we actually built a global database, that's when I came on board and we started actually analytics on top of the reporting. So that's in place now for 4 years. We're doing good work, but we're not really finished, as in there's lots more to do. We have in 2016 merged with our assessments department. I'll also reflect on that a little bit, but just to show that we have been busy on this topic for quite a while, and this has been our journey. So just a little bit more about my department is that on the basis of all that we do is actually the policies and processes that decide or that specify what sort of data we collect on our employees. So we, and who actually gets to see those data. So we choose global processes and procedure, which means that someone in the US actually has the same job rate system as someone in Europe or in Asia. We also when it comes to accessing the data, we follow same routines in Europe, where data privacy restrictions are big, as in bigger than in the US, but we actually follow exactly the same procedures, just to make sure that we don't accidentally make mistakes. All the data, the demographical data, is stored in this global database, and we to date have a SAP system, but later this year in October we actually go live with Workday SaaS solution. Quite exciting because, as you can imagine, an implementation like that at shell scale is quite a lot of work and stress. My reporting team, management information team, is actually extracting all that data into management information, as I said. So they deliver to senior stakeholders. They deliver sometimes ad hoc reports, but quite for strategic level reporting. So all the HRAMs or so, they use self-reporting tools. We started 4 years back with analytics to actually assess more strategic questions, as in, are these policies and procedures right? Do we need to have variable pay, or should it be different, or whatever the question was, or is our standard 4-year job rotation the right length? But we found that all the demographical data isn't precisely giving us the information we need. And that's when we merged with our assessments and surveys team. So assessments and surveys give us valuable information around behaviors, perceptions, personalities, and that is much more informative around how people perform in an organization than the demographical data. And that's why we merged. That's also where we closely work together. All like the survey are evaluated by analytics. They lead to stronger designs, etc., etc. So it's a department that works across all the evidence collected. Yeah. What my summary of the analytics department that probably people are is that they answer 2 types of questions. It's the why and the so what question. All the reporting that we've delivered or that we are delivering doesn't necessarily give answers as to why you see certain effects. So you can report high attrition, low attrition, high absenteeism, low absenteeism, but it doesn't tell you why you see low attrition in a certain department versus another. For that, you need to actually do more complex modeling and actually understand the relations between the various metrics. And that's when it comes to old-fashioned statistics that is necessary to find drivers, right? So it's around drivers of performance, and it's drivers of attrition or any other effect we're interested in. The other question is around the so what. So if we understand the differences in the outcomes, do we actually also understand how it impacts business performance? So analytics on HR data alone is interesting, but it becomes even more interesting if we actually can connect it to business data. So do we actually understand how the variable pay works on objective performance measures? Do we actually understand how variable pay impacts salespeople or R&D people or executives? Those are the type of questions where we actually are interested in connecting cross-functional data, and that's probably where we internally have our biggest successes. The standard approach for us is to start with a question, which sounds silly, but we've made a few times a mistake. Sometimes we started off with something we thought was interesting, and then at the very end of a project come to the conclusion that no one was interested in the answer. And I put, we tend to look at academic evidence first, as in they know a lot of things that we have not yet necessarily implemented, but we don't need to start from scratch on every question that we ask. So if we want to know if 4-year job rotation is the right length, we can actually go to research and look at the relation between tenure and performance. And we do some checking of what's been published, of what the effects are, and it gives us handles to understand where we need to be looking in our databases. The third box here, collecting and mapping data, is the most frustrating phase, and it's also taking a lot of time. So in the reality of a data scientist life, it can take months to actually find the right data and to connect it to connect the various databases. And then once you're finally there, you get sort of the treat of the analytics. But my experience in HR is that that's when the fun starts, because then you get the discussions, right? So you find drivers of performance, but when you want to make changes to the policies, or when you want to, then actually you get all the council discussions, or the factors that you know, like you need to argue basically with the strong experience that people have, and why things have been implemented. And sometimes there are really strong arguments. It's also that data, as it's collected today, isn't complete. There's a lot of things about human beings that we don't yet understand. So discussion phase is in Shell quite long, and then sometimes there's action. Sometimes it's decided there is no action. Yeah. So just I thought to bring a little case study to make it a little bit more alive. And I brought the one from the development of our new leadership program. And the reason I did is because last week we won an award, so I want to showcase that a little bit. So it was on LinkedIn. We post around it because we are sort of honored by getting some positive recognitions here. But so we, if you can find it on my LinkedIn profile, but from I4CP, we won an award. The topic of this is one that I'm hoping is on your radar already. It's the relation between engagement and performance, and how leadership drives engagement. And 4 years back, this was the first topic that I worked on, because we were doing an annual employee survey where we measured engagement. And of course, there's a lot of people who believe that engagement drives performance, but there was also still probably quite a few people in the company who didn't necessarily believe that they needed to act on the engagement figures. And what we did, we actually looked at our performance ranking against engagement, and we saw that high performers were typically much more engaged. This is a correlation. We also did causality checks, and actually we found that it's indeed true. If someone is engaged, they're much more likely to perform better. This is still HR data. So as I said, it becomes more interesting when you can connect it to business data. So we did a study across many refineries across the globe. So we have quite a few. And we looked at the number of safety incidents, which is for us one of the most important metrics as a company. We looked at the number of safety incidents relating to the engagement. Then we could actually find that the higher engaged the team was, the lower the number of safety incidents. You know, it wasn't rocket science. Academics had published this relation already before, but because we could actually quantify the relation and actually pinpoint that what the cost of low engaged team was, it suddenly puts it on the priority list, as in, hey, it's actually important, and if we improve, we may actually reduce the number of safety incidents. You would find the same with absenteeism, like higher engagement leads to lower absenteeism. Higher engagement leads to more sales or more customer satisfaction. We've done a few checks, but actually this is one I can share. But then convincing everyone that engagement was important, the next question was, of course, like, yeah, but how do we build engagement? And you know, if you review academic literature, then of course you end up quickly with the topic of leadership. And I thought to just do a little poll again to get you thinking, because we assessed also the relationship between leadership and engagement, and we asked the question, to what extent is leadership explaining the variation in employee engagement? So I carry my own engagement, but the fact that I have a boss that I do or do not like, of course, impacts my engagement. And there's also multiple other factors that, like the sort of whether the organization in which I work, whether I support that. So appreciate if you could, you know, participate in this little poll.
Esther here. Leadership means my manager.
That's a good one. So both, so I haven't explained, but yeah, it's a good question. It's team leadership and organizational leadership.
Hopefully you can see the results, Esther.
I can. Can everyone else see the results? So 60 to 80%, that's the majority vote. Well, that is a lot. I see some people who believe 100% of engagement is explained by leadership. I hope that people also carry personal motivation to work. Otherwise, it's a heavy task for leaders in the organization. But if they have a bad day, there is no business performance. That would be bad. But everyone believes that there is an impact from leadership on the engagement of employees. And maybe the question wasn't very clear if there was maybe more people who.
And I'm sorry, is this something that you did globally for the analysis, or is for a specific scope?
No, so we did it at global scale. So I'll just show you here the numbers I've taken out. But say that I think we found that around so there is like team leads are very important. So your direct leader, but also how people perceive the organizational leadership. So like sort of the many layers above them, right? Or the and both. And this has different shapes and forms depending on how you calculate it, but I would say that around 50% of employee engagement is probably, the variation in it is probably explained by how people perceive their leadership in the organization. So it's quite a lot, but it's luckily not 100%. It's also your own mood, your work-life balance, and all these other things. Yeah. So leadership became, in the last years, we have actually done a lot of work on leadership because we found that the impact of that on employees was so big that it was worth investigating. And what you see here is a little chart where we actually looked at from our survey. We also capture how people perceive their direct leadership. And we actually qualified, we actually categorize that leadership into like high performers, low performers, and medium performers. And we looked at sort of the stickiness, right? So actually someone who's getting a high score, are these people, is that just luck in a certain year, or is this skill? And we found that actually 65% repetition rate there. So if someone is perceived by their team as a good leader, the chances are 65% that next year they're again perceived as a high scoring leader. So that's the good news. The bad news is at the bottom of the chart is that actually poor leadership is also very sticky. So we found that if leaders are struggling, that actually they don't seem to improve by themselves. It's very likely that the year after they will, despite this feedback, still struggle to be good leads. So the obvious recommendation here is to intervene and to offer help. We firmly believe that you actually can develop people. So we actually felt that we needed to intervene. And that's when we formed, sorry, I didn't realize this was an animated slide. But we formed a collaboration of people, and this is the team that won the award. But I do the analytics, but I'm not exactly skilled in making shell in HR procedures. So we need a little help. And the help we received was around performance management from Ed Pierce. It's around leadership development, Silva Giuliano, and Graham Sparks, who's around diversity and inclusion, because inclusion is a very strong topic in the leadership field. And I put there Thomas and myself because we both contributed heavily. Thomas has left Shell, but we kudos to him as well for the work at the start of this.
And just a silly question, Esther. Sorry to interrupt you. In terms of structure, why do you have a people analytics and experience in HR data analytics? Is it the same vertical? You both report under the same the CHRO, or is that a different vertical?
Sorry, he's not. Sorry, this is his job title at NAB, which is a different company. So he's my predecessor.
Oh, gotcha.
Sorry, it's just yeah.
Gotcha.
So we developed a leadership program, a new one, and it's just quick and it's not intended for, I can share it, but it's not, I don't want to go into detail. But we developed a new leadership program where we actually, where the sort of the evidence of the fact that, that all the evidence I've just shown you before, that we actually needed to intervene and what needed to be taught to leaders, because in the survey, it goes to a little bit more detail on what are the skills that people need, right? So we actually can also see what the skills are that we need to develop in our people. Such as, I'm just giving you here an example, is that we also changed our survey vendor because we felt that we needed more better quality information, and the survey vendor provides us information around what drives beyond leadership, what drives engagement in a team. So what you can see here is that the content of a job is very important to this team. So it's the reputation. So you could actually you actually derive from the survey information of what is important to the people in the team. Let me see. Supposed to talk for half an hour, but almost there. So the development of this leadership program was a bit bumpy. So as I said, 4 years ago, the first insights on engagement and performance, well, they're 4 years old. The leadership insights are probably 2 to 3 years old, and the development. So last year we went live with the new leadership program. We've learned, we've tested and piloted, failed fast, but we have actually collected all the evidence to be confident that this was the right track. All the bumps didn't get us off track. We actually persisted and came up with a high quality leadership development program. What was very strong was that we did this as a team across the silos of HR. So I think that's the lessons we learned and find valuable. This was about the content I wanted to share, and I think I'll open up the floor for discussions, and I need to stop sharing my slides. That's instructions from Shane, I think.
Thanks very much, Esther. I really, really appreciate your insights here. And it's so nice to see an organization that's been involved in people analytics for such a long time. I'm sure that there's a lot of other businesses that are really new to this. So I really appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing the slides. They're really informative. Thank you. So yeah, guys, we're gonna jump into the interactive element part now. So this is the part where any questions you've got for either Esther or for Gustavo. He seems to be leading the show at the moment as well in questions. Not to put you on the spot, Gustavo, but it seems like you could answer a few questions too. But of course, getting the everyone else's perspective is also a big thing, and this is the reason why we have the Q&A. So validating what you're doing, not only with Esther, but with the entire group, is a real important thing for us. So feel free to jump into this conversation here, guys. If you want to ask Esther or anyone else, this is your stage, this is your podium, so feel free.
Well, thank you for sharing. Very good information. Something that I'm curious is, most companies have some kind of action plan as part of the engagement program. One of the first things we did in Walmart is to actually look at the cost effect between the action plan and the scores, because we were not having good action plans to actually drive the engagement scores. Did you actually guys look at that, or you thought that's not as important as leadership and other factors?
Well, the action plan, they were there, but they were not stored, not in a system. And the new vendor does provide these action plans. So actually, in an environment that we can actually analyze that. So since last year we can, but at the time we did the analysis, we couldn't. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have another question, Esther. You mentioned what is very true, which is that when HR data starts being combined with business data, it becomes even more valuable, and the insights become interesting to everyone, not just HR. How do you deal with the competition that inevitably arises between HR and other areas as to who owns the data and who has access or is given access to different pieces of information. How do you collaborate with other areas so that they open up and share this information with you?
Yeah, good question. I can't see who's asking a
This
question.
is Salvador.
Okay.
Salvador Erickson. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Sorry. So yeah, no, you're right, and it's a good question because well, it's not so. Yeah, you call it competition, but it's more like protectionism. So, are you gonna share these results with people that I don't want to? Or so when I said we made mistakes on starting with a question, we also made many mistakes on stakeholders engagement, and we've learned that it's very important that before we start any work, we actually are confident that that the stakeholder landscape is supportive of the project, including the ones on the business side. So many times we actually come across interesting projects through connects at sort of the data scientist level. So people talk and they chat and they have this amazing idea. But if we don't ensure like senior sponsorship on it, then we're not getting anywhere. So we need to have someone who approves access to the data, but also make sure that actually they're willing to act on the data or on the outcomes of the studies. And we do that through through collaboration. That's the only way we can do it. In a way, it's all working towards sort of company analytics, right? It shouldn't be HR analytics in its isolation, but that's basically how we're structured today, and everyone is. But work in progress. That's all I can say.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Thank you.
I was just going to comment on that. I think we need to obviously democratize the data so everybody needs to gain out of it. But I don't know if it's your experience. In my case, it was easier to get data from other areas for me to use in HR than for me to share to other areas, like in marketing or finance and so on, because of the confidentiality of the data. So in a sense, we have an advantage as long as you have good peers and good collaboration across the board. That's what I say.
Yeah, you're right. And when it comes to people data, I'm also happy that someone is protective of my data, right? I mean, you only need to open up the newspaper today, but it's true that we prefer to be sort of involved in the analysis rather than give it away, because people don't really understand the sensitivities of the data if they're not thoroughly trained by HR. But I see that as our role, and so far, people, when we explain, have understood that we need to take that role, and we can get in serious trouble with all the councils, and you don't really say it, Gustavo, but the the European sentiment around using employee data is quite strong. So we need to take that into account. I can't read and talk at the same time. So if there's any interesting questions there, Shane, I hope you can help.
Yeah, Esther, let me help out. So Muriel Schultz has asked a question. She's the HR Foresight Director at Adio Company, huge retail organization headquartered in France. And she said, well, what is the last learning that was on your last slide? It was on the right-hand side. I think she just wants a little bit more information. If you can't remember, don't worry, I'll share the slide deck. But yeah, she just said, thanks for sharing. Key question is to find a key question to ask. How did you address this topic? So Muriel, if you want to join in the conversation and elaborate a little bit more on that, I'm sure you're much more qualified to do so than myself. But feel free to answer there, Esther, if you can.
We can't hear you, Muriel.
Okay, if that's the case, no problem. So Fernanda would basically say, for having good quality engagement data is really important.
So I'm happy to answer the question, but I could see Muriel talking, but she's on mute. But anyway, so
okay. Can you hear me that way?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. Well, thanks for sharing. Yes, you said many times, and I fully agree, that it's very important to define the quick questions to ask. So there was some kind that I wanted to know if you have some kind of methodology or insight you would like to share. As a HADEO, we are very much at the beginning of the journey, I mean, in comparison to what you've done already. And we are trying to start with the good questions, the strategic question to ask. And it's so vast that I was wondering if you can give us some insight on that side.
I think you need to start with what's important in your company, right? So for us, safety data was not an accident. I'm sorry, that's a funny word choice, but it was not coincidental that we started to look at the at safety data, because it's, as I said, it's one of our most important, well, not the most important safety metric that the important metric we have in the company. So I'm not sure what's important in your company, but if it's customer satisfaction, then that's where you need to start. And I think it's a sort of almost a consultant, not almost, it is a consultant's job to actually talk to people and see how they believe that staff is influencing that metric. So how do they think that people are, and if I take customer satisfaction, so I'm not sure if it's your metric, but if that's if people believe that your staff is influencing customer satisfaction through I don't know, the way they have a conversation, that's what you need to go after, right? So that I would start there. What are your important metrics, and how do you think the relation to your employees is there?
Thank you.
Hi, Esther. This is Steve from Procter & Gamble. I have a kind of a specific question about the case study that you showed us on the ratings of leadership, and good leaders are more likely to be consecutively rated good leaders, and same with bad leaders. When you're looking at that, do you see, is that the single most significant predictor of your likelihood of being bucketed into one of those buckets, or are there other things that you were able to look at in terms of performance of the overall business, or whether a leader has moved into a new organization? I find that a really interesting result, because there's so many other factors that would be involved in that I'm wondering if that kind of emerged above and beyond everything else.
So this was, it depends what you're looking at, right? So if you, the holy grail of the work is to find objective performance metrics, right? So it's how do you evaluate leadership for all leaders in your organization? And for us, we can't evaluate them with the same financial metrics for all of our leaders. So they're simply not aligned. So it would be, if you wanted to evaluate someone in R&D, you wanted to evaluate them on the number of innovations, not necessarily how much money they make, because that's probably only after we take that in production. So it's around, depending on what level you look, if you do the same exercise in with comparable functions, comparable positions, and you can take a financial metric. Yeah, you're right. But this one was at a bigger, at a much bigger scope. So it's not the only metric that we used, but it's one that that is easy to explain here. Yeah. If that makes sense, is that answering your question? Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think we find that we prefer to do everything at global scale, and maybe in an ideal world, all of our employees would have the same motivation and the same metrics to measure, but it's not the way, right? Sometimes I'm jealous of a bank where you have so many stores, and they all have exactly the same metrics and maybe the same type of population. We don't have this, right? So we have we're much bigger business, and they all have their own performance metrics, and either we look at a smaller subset and we define for a subset what the metric is, or if we look global, we are restricted in what we can derive.
Esther, I've literally got the same question from a couple of guys, from Tiffany over at Brown Forman and Fernanda at Andritz, and it's literally saying, what is the vendor that you use for your engagement?
Yeah, it's ANOVA. It's I can type that up if that's useful.
What I'll definitely do is I'll link it in the description in the private community, guys, So if you want to just head over to the website, once we get the recording up there, you'll be able to access everything. But yeah, if you can help me out there, Esther, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, we're very happy with them. We use them now for a little while. It's much better than what we had. So they will probably be pleased if I that I mentioned them. Yeah.
It's always good PR. What were you using beforehand? Were you using something like Hogan Assessments or something?
No, but that would be nasty, right? If I would say what the vendor is thinking that. So and the frequency is we still do it on an annual basis. We have a very high response rate. We have 80+% response rate. So we are very careful to keep that. That's also so we feel reluctant to go to continuous engagement measures, also because what we see isn't giving much more information than what we have. We would like to have it a bit more frequent. We've tried 3 years in a row to do like halfway the year, like smaller pulse survey type, but it never got to the level of quality that we were used to from the annual one. So we ended up using the annual survey anyway. So we stopped it for now, and let's see what for engagement measures at least, and we will investigate when, how, if we do anything else in going forward. Yeah, I'm curious to. So I'm talking all the time, but I'm curious if other people have different experiences, right? So if anyone has a really high quality continuous engagement experience or something.
I think, well, there are two ways to look at it. If you have an engagement program and you cannot do something with information, then what's the point of having a lot of frequency? However, it's hard to do something very advanced with modeling if you don't have enough, like a time series to actually do analysis. So in my case, we use a panel to actually do monthly surveys for a smaller population to do some more modeling. And we used to have once a year the overall broad engagement survey, which is more for the inclusiveness of the organization, to express your voice and so on. Two different objectives, right? Depending on what you're trying to do.
We are doing roughly the same. We just introduced for a short period of time another way to measure. It's a combination of engagement and satisfaction, as you clearly mentioned. Customer satisfaction in a retail organization is absolutely strategic. And so we have designed, because we were not finding outside what we wanted, we have designed our own index. So we do it on a regular basis, maybe 3 to 4 times a year maximum. So it's a sample each time, and which allows us to have on a very short amount of questions to have the trends. And at the same time, we keep the global engagement survey once a year, which is, I fully agree, much more qualitative. So it's 2 different objectives. One is much to keep up the trends, be sure that we don't have suddenly in the organization somewhere where it's going bad, because we are in a period of huge transformation. So we thought we need something that is more giving us like a trends, but we fully agree that you need a 1 year more full engagement survey, which give you better results. That's where we are now.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
It seems like most people are there or thereabouts. I think the yearly engagement survey, although everyone wants it dead in the water, it's still the best source of data, right? And I think it's not going to change until something radical comes out different. Esther, you just got another question as well from Tiffany, which hopefully you can see, or Fernanda.
We measure engagement enablement with less than 9% turnover. We have found that connectors 2 years. Is none of you implementing sort of this continuous, like one of these startup tools that
Yes,
bugging me?
yes, we did this. We find a very interesting one. This is a French wine, and in fact, it's our business unit in Russia. Russia, it's more or less today it's 25,000 people working in Russia. And the growth is absolutely huge. We open 10 to 15 stores each year. and it's roughly 6,000 to 7,000 people that we recruit each year. So how we measure that the climate is really good, and it's a really interesting startup. They combine engagement questions, but very much linked to the climate. How do you feel? And their methodology is really interesting, because just with 4 questions, they can ask, because they go on a rotative system. So you answer every 2 weeks, every month, if you want. So it's really ongoing, but it's only 4 questions, no more. And the way it comes back to you, you never have the same questions, so you don't get bored. The name of the startup is Octomine, and they are now working with, we are launching the test in Russia on 10 stores. And so far, the results are really interesting. And it's also a way for us to implement feedback. We are very much in our leadership model, we work very much on feedback. So we are trying very hard to implement a feedback culture. And continuous feedback, like those Pulse survey, they help you to introduce this feedback loop and feedback tools. They have also a nice thing, which is integrated data reports. So because when you have engagement survey, one of the very difficult things is how you manage the data, how you communicate, how you engage managers into actions. And here they have integrated all those questions. So it's quite interesting. It's a test.
Thank you.
Have you ever used a company like that, Esther? Is this the first time you've ever come across them, Octomine?
So this one I don't know, but I've seen other applications, and they go from things we couldn't possibly do, as in mining email data to assess sentiments, to sort of pop-ups with smileys, or which we don't believe is any validity. And then, thinking on that, it's interesting, the concept of the 4 questions, but then you only get engagement, right? So we are, what the annual survey gives is much more than that. So
yes,
ours is
well,
like, you would need both, kind of, yeah.
Exactly, and it's much more a climate, how people feel, than a real engagement survey. For me, it's not replacing, definitely not replacing engagement survey. It's much more, it's a tool really good, dedicated when you have lots of people on the floor. And when you need people that are really highly motivated to serve the customer, then you need to feel the mood. So it's more a mood survey than an engagement survey. So once again, it's a kind of complementary action.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I was gonna say, there are many companies that are not using engagement as the main metric. Some companies use actually happiness. Some companies use employee experience. So, it depends on what you're trying to do, and it depends on how your company is set up. So, she mentioned, it all depends on the objective. To tell you the truth, a lot of these companies that grew up with the engagement in traditional platforms, I'm not a fan of for the modeling piece. So I try to stay away from those for modeling. I try to use more like smaller shops that I can do something on a more regular basis. That's my preference.
If it's okay with everyone, I might switch the topic slightly. Esther, I'm curious if you have ever used data analytics to analyze organization design.
Ooh, good one. The short answer is no. But it is on the long agenda because it's an interesting topic. So we had a complete reorg in the org design department, so it wasn't the right time. But it's something that we've done a few first investigations on whether we could see relations between like engagement or anything else and span of control or something. So it is definitely on the agenda. Yeah, but and it's certainly something I believe we should be looking in. But it's not, the leadership topic was a much bigger fish to catch, right? So the leadership one is more, I believe, more influencing than the org design itself. Like you can have the best organization, but with poor leaders, it's still not going to work, and the other way around, I guess. But yeah, it's something where we also are in need of more data, perhaps, because the org design itself is not in isolation. So you need to connect it to preferably, sort of how teams are working together. So that's the area, the direction we're thinking in.
We're at agile organizations, right? And so some of the work that, like ING has done lately, and some of the tech companies have done in terms of how do they put together these squads and tribes and chapters, and but this agile organization, it's interesting, and many companies have these testing, different parts of and their their organization. So it's almost kind of engagement, design, performance, like how do those three work together, which I know is super, super complicated. It kind of blows my mind to think about what you would even measure on the organization design, to your point. But I think more of, do certain organizations design help you better achieve your strategies than others? I don't know. It feels super nebulous, but I was just curious if you guys have done anything on that yet.
No, and actually, you mentioned a very valid point. So we are not an agile organization, far from. We're in oil industry, but so org design is, when I said like capturing data, we have the formal org structures in the databases, but when it comes, so when you mention agile, it's around the project teams, right? And we need a way to sort of understand who works with whom, rather than how the formal org structure is, to actually, so if we limit ourselves to what the formal organization looks like, we're probably missing information. If that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I was just curious because I haven't heard anybody talk about it, and you seem really mature on your, data and analytics journey. We're still just beginning, so I was curious if people just aren't talking about it, or if it's as hard as it looks.
So I comment. So this is Kevin Zan with Allergan. So this is not something that we're currently doing at Allergan, but I've seen it elsewhere. What they've done is they did use not so much engagement survey, but more survey related to kind of figure out how they should design their organization. So what they've done is they do focus group sessions, do surveys as well, to really understand how employees desire to work together. So and I'm referring to one of the tech companies, so they studied how their engineers were able to work together. So they essentially, their case was, before they went on this assessment, all of their engineers, were remote workers, and that was a big selling point for them. So they're saying, hey, come join our company, our engineers, you can work from home. And they quickly realized through performance benchmarks, looking at studying productivity, and also looking at communication, they had some focus group with them and had some surveys with them, and they started to realize that these remote workers were not really performing well, and they weren't really performing to the best of their capability. So then they started doing a pilot where they started to get a lot of engineers together to kind of in close proximity, so kind of working side by side in a more team atmosphere, and they found that was actually a lot more productive. So at that point, they started to redesign their engineering organization, where they actually eliminated the ability to work remotely, and then started having strategically placed locations throughout the US and start internationally, where they're supposed to be more like engineering hubs, so where their engineers can work from those offices. So that's kind of one thing that I heard other folks have done. In terms of for us in Allergan, we're trying to embed analytics as well in our org design, but we're in very beginning stages of it. So I think we're struggling with some of the same things that you guys are. And essentially what we're doing right now is we're trying to just provide overall visibility into even just what our organization looks like. So in terms of, staffing ratios, engineers to engineers to engineering managers, or even sales managers to sales staff. So we're looking at a lot of those ratios. Other parts we're looking at is just in terms of like layers. How many layers do we have in each part of our organization? And we're doing a initial baseline right now. So lay out what does it currently look like, and what does our engagement look like as of right now? And we're looking to study a year from now, because we're making some changes organizationally. So we want to study a year from now what will be the results. But that's kind of what we're doing, and kind of what I heard from other folks are doing.
That's amazing. Kev, what company was the tech organization? Are you able to say? I mean, is it somewhere that you used to work, or did you just read up on this?
Yeah, it's in the I can't reveal the name of the company, because it's part of the my consulting work. It was one of my clients at the time. But they are, I can say, they're part of the financial tech industry. Financial tech.
Here at Philips, I'm Chris with Philips. We've used some organizational network analysis, so we do spans and layers and kind of the standard org design kind of views. But we have done the organizational network analysis a few times, which is who is talking to who, because we know we're highly matrixed. So your reporting line teams aren't who you work with day to day. You're working with other functions, other markets, other locations. So we've done that a couple of times, and it's pretty labor intensive. So it's not something we do regularly, but we do. You can either use mining of who's sending who emails, and just who's the from and to, and who's connecting to who, and you can find in the organization where those connection points are. Is one way we've done it, using one of a consulting firm. Insert big consulting firm here, but you can also do that quite easily if you've got some tech savvy IT people to do a link. Something else we've done was a more softer version where we actually asked our top employees, who do you go to when you need to know how things are done around here? And just give us a name or two. And then they gave us those names, and we asked those people the same question. And we did that about 5 or 6 rounds, just sending those people, who do you go to when you need to know how things work around here? And from that, we were also able to find out who these key influencers were in the organization. So they may not be in the specific role, but they were people that were becoming span breakers or linking into other parts of the organization. So we found some really interesting connection points there, and also weaknesses where we had organizations that weren't connecting as much as we thought they should.
Thanks very much for your insights there, Chris. I mean, is anyone operating on a similar level to that?
I had a question, but you muted me. Can I ask Chris, how did you turn it into action? So when you know the influences, what did you? Can you share something around the actions you took?
Yeah, absolutely. In that second example I gave, we were having a change transformation we were going through. So we've moved from becoming a electronics conglomerate into more healthcare focused business. We recently sold off our lighting unit. We've sold off our television units, for example, and becoming more focused around healthcare. So we were looking for change ambassadors, culture champions that could help us hear what the local employees were saying, but also act as a communication trends or a communication venue for us as well. So we used that actually to find out who these people were that people were talking to and saw as influencers, and then we used them to create a change champion network in that case. So that was for a very specific purpose.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's very good, Chris, and I like the idea of the asking the question. 2 things. One, getting the data is very difficult, like you said, very labor intensive. In the past, we used a company called Volumetrics to help us get to the data and do some analysis. I'm going to spell that out. The other thing is that I think Volumetrics was recently acquired by Microsoft. So I think if your IT team is able to take the data from the back end, you might be able to get access to who's talking to whom and who goes to the meetings. And that will help you get to the connectors. And then on how to use the information, we actually measure the amount of waste in like wasted time, wasted meetings, how many people are going to meetings, and actually come up with guidelines, because it's hundreds of millions of dollars that we were wasting on having meetings or discussions without adding any value. So that's kind of a way to gain some ROI from that kind of analysis.
Another way too, I've seen that analysis too, is use that analysis to measure org design as well. So if org design, if we reorg a part of our organization, do people still engage or interact the same way, or have that largely changed? So that's been used as well.
We've all gone silent, or
I think everyone was just trying to jot down the company, Gustavo, and and just do a quick search on a web browser. But it's in the comments section there if you want to check out Volumetrics and what they do.
well, there's another one, TrustSphere, that is seems to be good to know what to do.
It was a fantastic session, and thanks so much, Esther, for sharing all of your insights with us, and thanks to everyone as well for bringing your contribution. Chris, Kevin, Gustavo, Muriel, I really appreciate you guys jumping into the conversation and sharing what you're doing and what others are doing, and what's out there on the market. That's what makes this series what it is. So thanks so much for the contributions.